Connections California is Parents Helping Parents' newest program, and it is an online statewide resource hub where we address needs of transition to adulthood and adult services for families and people with disabilities. It's funded by Santa Clara Family Health Plan, so we're very grateful to them. And without further ado, I am going to introduce our speaker of the evening. So please help me in welcoming Jim Huyck from Huyck Consulting. Jim has served the needs of the disabilities community for over 40 years. He's assisted over 700 families and their loved ones with disabilities as they navigate through the special needs trust matters and various public benefits, including SSI, SSDI, MediCal, Medicare, Regional Center, and the rest. Jim's experience includes executive director of the Alta, California Regional Center in Sacramento. He's been a rehabilitation counselor with the California State Department of Rehabilitation and been at community college professor. And we welcome him this evening. So I'm going to stop sharing, allow Jim to share, and get on with it.
Alyssa, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim.
Let me see if I can share my screen. Can you see that okay?
We can.
Yeah. Okay, great. Again, thank you for having me. Appreciate the opportunity. We're going to be going through quite a bit of information. So as Alyssa said, if you've got some questions, if you can chat those over to her, and then we can try to address as many as we can. If we can't, I'm more than happy to take telephone calls from you folks afterwards and address any questions that you may have. So let's get started. We're not going to be covering all of this tonight because we don't have enough time, but public benefits can be divided into different sections. One is what's called needs-based public benefits, and is sometimes referred to as means tested. So for instance, with SSI, it's got a $2,000 resource limit. MediCal has a resource limit, although it has changed, and IHSS. There are programs, though, that are called entitlement programs, and that means the individual is entitled to those programs because they either paid into the Social Security insurance program or their parents did. And we will be talking about Social Security disability insurance, childhood disability benefits in a moment. We'll go into more detail on that, and Medicare. Other benefits programs are Regional Center and Department of Rehabilitation. And so we'll see how far we can get to covering those also, at least Regional Center. Okay, first of all, Supplemental Security Income, SSI. SSI has two primary criteria. One is that the individual is disabled, and that's under Social Security's rules of what disabled is, and we'll go into more of that in a moment. And also there's financial criteria. There's a resource test, and then there's income that can affect the amount of SSI that the individual gets. So what is disabled according to Social Security? Disabled, first of all, has to be a disability that's expected to last 12 months or more or result in death. And the individual has to be found not capable of achieving what's called substantial gainful activity. That is Social Security's buzzword for being able to work. We refer to it SGA, substantial gainful activity. They operationally define that as the capability of the individual to gross $1,350 per month. Now, that doesn't mean that the individual has had a job where they have grossed that much, but that they're capable of that. And also that they again, that not that they haven't earned that much, but that they're capable of doing that. So the resource test for SSI is that the person cannot have more than $2,000. If it's a couple, it's a combination of the couple's resources. It can be $3,000. But for SSI, the individual can only have $2,000. And that does not count a house if they happen to own a house, as long as they live in it. If they have an automobile of any value, that's not counted. Furniture, clothing, personal care items aren't counted. Burial plots, certain types of life insurance. Now, there are two primary types of life insurance. There's whole life, which has cash value, and there's term life. If it's term life, that doesn't have cash value, so it's not counted towards the $2,000 resource limit. If it's whole life, it has cash value, and that would be counted. Now, what they also should not count as a resource are special needs trusts. And I think some of you folks may have those, either what's called a first-party special needs trust, which means it's funded by the individual's money, or a third-party special needs trust, which usually is funded at the time of the parent's passing, and the inheritance of the disabled adult child passes directly into a special needs trust. That should not count as a resource. Now, Social Security wants to see those trusts. So when I assist families in applying for SSI for their loved ones, and we inform Social Security that there's a special needs trust, Social Security wants to see a copy of the trust. They want to see how it was funded, because there's a big difference between a first party and a third party special needs trust. Again, a first party special needs trust is when it's funded by the individual's money. I deal with a number of families that have had personal injury lawsuits because their child was injured at birth, and the child is awarded possibly millions of dollars. That is the child's money. That goes into a special needs trust. That's first party. And a first party special needs trust has to have in it what's called MediCal payback language, which means that upon the passing of the child, the adult child, MediCal gets paid up to the amount that they have paid since the trust was established, the amount that they've paid for services for the adult disabled child. Now, a third-party special needs trust does not have MediCal payback language. And again, a third-party special needs trust is if it's funded by any other source except the individual. It could be family, friends, GoFundMe account, grandparents, whatever. As long as it's not funded by the individual, it's a third-party special needs trust, does not have MediCal payback language. And the other big difference between the two is that first-party special needs trusts have to be what's called sole beneficiary. That means that no one is to benefit from the trust except the individual themselves. Third-party special needs trust, anyone can benefit from it. It does not have to be sole beneficiary. So Social Security wants to see the trust. They want to see how it was established. If it was established by the court, they want to see the court documents. If it was funded from a settlement, they want to see how the money flowed directly from the settlement into the trust. If it was funded by the parents, they want to see the money flowed directly from the parents into the trust and did not pass through the hands of the adult child, because if it did, then it would be a first-party special needs trust. So anyway, that's something that Social Security looks at, and they have a special cadre of experts that review those trusts. So if we're applying for SSI for someone and they have a special needs trust, it takes a lot longer to get them approved for SSI, because Social Security goes through this whole process of reviewing all of the documents related to the special needs trust. They also want to look at the distributions that are being made from the trust, because if there's distributions that are being made from the trust, then that can affect the SSI, and I think we talk about that in a moment. So the other part of being eligible for SSI is the income test. And the income reduces the amount of monthly SSI payments available to the person with a disability. So it's, in some ways, it's not a test. It really is just that if the individual has any income, it can affect the amount of SSI they get. And you have to forget all about IRS rules, because Social Security has their own definition of income. And they have three different types of income. Earned income, which is wages, that's pretty straightforward. If the individual on SSI is earning money, the first $20 of any source of money doesn't count, doesn't affect the SSI. The next $65 of earned income does not count. So that's up to $85 a month of earned income would not affect the amount of SSI. But anything over the 85, then there's a reduction in the SSI check of 50 cents on the dollar. So they give you a little bit of an incentive to work. They don't cut your SSI check dollar for dollar. However, unearned income, that's if the individual, the beneficiary, receives cash gifts, receives any money from any other source. After the first $20 in any particular month, the SSI check is reduced dollar for dollar. And there's also what's called in-kind income. Now, that is if the individual who is on SSI is not paying for their own food and shelter in 2022, in this year, their SSI check would be reduced by $280. So that gets us down to like $760, because the maximum amount of SSI an individual can receive if they're paying for their own food and shelter in 2022 is $1,040.21. Now, that's going to be going up next year because there's going to be quite a cost of living increase for all beneficiaries of Social Security benefits. But right now, the maximum, if an individual is paying for their own food and shelter, is $1,040.21, and it's reduced by $280 if the individual is not paying for their own food and shelter. So what we do is we get an individual on SSI, they get about $760, and then we have, I know it sounds strange, but we have the adult disabled child begin to pay rent to the parents for renting a room in their house. There's an actual Social Security form that we use. Parent becomes the landlord, the adult child becomes the tenant. The parent signs a form stating that they are the tenant, they are the landlord for their tenant child, and that they're charging them the same amount that they would charge anybody to rent a room in their house. We fill that form out. The payments start to flow between the SSI that the adult is receiving to the parent. We document that to Social Security, and then the SSI rate is increased to the maximum of $1,040. Okay, there is a process by which the income and resources of a person, such as a parent, is deemed to the child. So therefore, we don't, if the parents have any sort of income and assets, we wait to apply for SSI for the disabled child until they become 18. Because at 18, the parent's income and resources or assets are no longer deemed or counted as the child's. So through 17, until they're 18, we usually can't get them on SSI, again, because the parent's income and assets are too high. But at 18, then only the adult child's income and resources are counted. And if there's a spouse, their income and assets are deemed to the other spouse also. So again, we wait to apply for the benefit until the 18th birthday. And the maximum amount right now is $1,040.21, and that is if the adult child is paying the parents for room rental and their fair share of the household food. Okay, the great thing about SSI is that, and this is many times very important to families and to the individual, is that if you're on SSI, you automatically get MediCal. It's called Medicaid in every other state, so don't get confused. MediCal in California. And that MediCal has no share of cost, which means there's no deductible. There's no amount that the individual has to pay before MediCal kicks in. Now, there are other ways to qualify for MediCal. Let's say the individual's assets were too high, that their resources were over $2,000. Therefore, they didn't qualify for SSI, therefore didn't qualify for SSI-linked MediCal, but they may still be eligible for MediCal through some other programs. One of them is called the Aged and Disabled Federal Poverty Level. That has an income limit of $1,563. So as long as the individual has income from all sources of less than $1,563, then we can get them on the Aged and Disabled Federal Poverty Level MediCal, which has no share of cost. Now, if they go $1 over that, then we have to get the individual on Aged, Blind, and Disabled Medically Needy MediCal. That does have a share of cost. And the share of cost is calculated by taking the person's income, subtracting $600. That's their share of cost. That's the amount that they have to pay any month in which they want MediCal to also pay. It's like a deductible, and it starts over every month. So it's a monthly deductible. It's not a premium, it's a deductible. And then there's other ways to get MediCal. Let's say an individual wants to go to work and they really don't have any other source of health insurance. There's what's called the 250% Working Disabled program, which allows an individual, as long as they're making less than 250% of the federal poverty level, Then they can buy into the MediCal program and they pay a monthly premium depending upon how much they're making. It could be $20, $30, or it could be more than that. And then there's, under the Affordable Care Act, under Obamacare, California participates in what's called expanded MediCal, and that allows for individual to get MediCal without a resource test and to qualify for MediCal that way. Now, there is a really cool way that we get young people on the MediCal prior to age 18. Because remember, if they're not eligible for SSI-linked MediCal because the parents' income and resources are too high, but we still want them to be on MediCal, if they're with the regional center, we can get them on MediCal through what's called institutional deeming. It's a terrible name, but that's the name. To be qualified for MediCal through this process, again, the child, and we're talking about children under 18, must be regional center consumer, and they must have at least one service that's being funded by the regional center. The regional center then places the child onto what's called the DDS Medicaid Waiver Program. DDS stands for Department of Developmental Services. Then regional center requests that the local MediCal agency institutionally deem the child onto MediCal by only looking at the child's income and resources. Similar to when the child is over 18, when the parent's income and resources aren't counted for SSI purposes. This is only the child's income and resources are considered for getting the minor child on the MediCal when they're less than 18. And the other really important part of getting an individual, a child or an adult on MediCal is once they're on MediCal, then they can apply for in-home support services, which is an important service for a lot of our consumers. Okay, so we've talked about the SSI, supplemental security income. We've talked about the MediCal that comes with it. We've talked about how an individual can get MediCal even if they're not on SSI. We've talked about how they can get MediCal through the institutional deeming program, where the parents' income and resources aren't counted if the child's under 18, only their income and resources counted. Now, there's another program that we help lots of families with. That's called big long name, Social Security Disability Insurance Childhood Disability Benefits. Now, it used to be called Social Security Disability Insurance Disabled Adult Child. So you'll still hear a lot of the claims reps at Social Security refer to it as Disabled Adult Child rather than Childhood Disability Benefit. Don't get confused and think it's another benefit. It's the same. Okay, so how does an individual get onto this benefit program? This pays benefits to adults whose disability began before age 22. The adult has not achieved substantial gainful activity since 22. Remember, substantial gainful activity is the capability to gross $1,350. And again, I talk about the name change there. And the amount of benefit that the adult child would receive is equal to 50% of what the parent is receiving if they are receiving either Social Security disability or if they're receiving Social Security retirement. And when that parent dies, they get 75%. Now, it doesn't affect the parent's benefit. It's just that the disabled adult child's benefit is based upon what the parent was eligible for at full retirement age under Social Security, which right now is 66 and a half, or upon their passing, 75%. Or if the parent is on Social Security disability, the parent could be only 45 years old, but if they're on SSDI, Social Security Disability Insurance, then their disabled adult child can apply for this benefit, okay? Now, again, the parent must have paid into the Social Security system the required number of quarters in order to be eligible for either SSDI or Social Security retirement. Usually that's about 5 to 10 years of credits. The parent must be receiving Social Security retirement benefits or Social Security disability benefits. Like I said before, and or deceased and paid into the Social Security system. Now, what we do is we have the adult child pull off of the parent with the highest benefit amount. So you can have two parents, one who upon retiring on Social Security or getting disability benefits has a higher monthly benefit. Let's say the mother has $3,000 of benefit, husband only has $2,000. We want to pull off the parent that's going to give the highest benefit to the adult child. So sometimes we have parents make the decision for a couple of different reasons, which I'll get into. We have parents decide to take Social Security retirement earlier than they thought they were planning to do so that they can get their child onto this benefit. So you can go into Social Security at 62, or you can wait till you're 70. If you wait till you're 70, you get a higher monthly amount. But if you go on at 62, then you can apply, your child can apply for this benefit and begin to receive possibly a higher cash benefit than they would receive off of SSI. And by way, it's the amount that the child would receive in SSDI CDB, the benefit we're talking about, is counted as other income and reduces the SSI. So if the benefit under SSDI CDB, the benefit we're talking about, is high enough, it's going to bring the SSI check down to zero. If it's not, let's say the parent is only getting $1,000, therefore the child would get $500. The adult child would still be eligible, therefore, for some SSI. And sort of as a caveat to that, as long as the child is getting at least $1 of SSI, they can get MediCal. Because on this benefit, you don't get MediCal, you get Medicare. The child gets Medicare 24 months after they've been on this benefit. And that is a better benefit than MediCal. So some parents, as I said before, they decide to retire early to start that 24-month clock. It could be that the situation is that maybe the child's approaching 26 and the child can't remain on the parent's health insurance. Therefore, there needs to be another health insurance plan found. And so the parents say, well, we better start this benefit, Social Security disability benefits, start that 24-month clock. But in order to do that, they may have to retire earlier than they had planned. Okay, that was SSDI CDB in a nutshell. Now we go on to regional center. Okay, regional centers, they were created under the Lanterman Act. They were created back in the 60s. They are the private nonprofit corporations. I think a lot of people think they're state agencies, but they're not. They're private nonprofit corporations that contract with the Department of Developmental Services, the state agency, and they either provide or coordinate services and supports for individuals with developmental disabilities. Now, here's a map that shows the 21 regional centers throughout California. I ran the regional center in Sacramento. We serve 10 counties, Alta Regional Center. You folks are served by the regional centers according to your zip code is how it's determined. Okay, so what is the eligibility for regional center services? Eligibility is determined solely on meeting the definition of developmental disability. Now, this is for individuals over the age of 3. I'll get into the 2 programs in a moment that regional centers run. But there's no income or asset test. So nothing like what we were talking about, no income or asset test. And this program is unique to California. There are other states provide services to individuals with developmental disabilities, but there's many times waiting lists. In California, the regional center cannot put you on a waiting list to open the case and begin developing the IPP. Now, there may be waiting lists to find a vendor who can service the consumer, but in other states, they can put you on waiting lists. They have certain quotas. They can only put so many people into the system at a time. But in California, and it is unique, it is what's called an entitlement. Okay, so regional centers administer 2 programs. They administer the Early Start, sometimes referred to as the Early Intervention Program. That is for children ages 0 to 3. And there's a different definition that I'll get into in a moment that explains how you qualify for that Early Start, Early Intervention Program. And then the regional center also administers what we call the over 3 services, or continuing regional center services, and that's for children over the age of 3. And once you're eligible for that, you're eligible for the rest of your life. Okay, so what's the criteria for the Early Start, Early Intervention? This is for children younger than the age of 3 with exceptional needs who are at risk of becoming developmentally disabled or who have a developmental delay and may qualify for services. And right now they have a new category called provisional eligibility, which is ages 3 to 5. That was included just recently in the law because sometimes the regional centers just can't determine if the child will qualify for the over 3 services at age 3. So they have to wait until that they are age 5. Okay, so early intervention services are based on the child's assessed developmental needs. Early intervention services may include occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech and language services. Now, when I ran a regional center, only about a third of the kids that we served in the early intervention program went on to be eligible for the over 3 services. And that's good and bad news. The good news is the child, because they receive these services, is no longer diagnosed or isn't diagnosed as developmentally disabled. Bad news is that the parents are no longer going to receive services and their child is not going to receive services from the regional center. The regional center is supposed to do an assessment at age 3 to determine if the child is eligible for over 3. But I've also seen that many times the regional center just says to the family, we're going to turn you over to education. Education will handle you from here on out. And they don't tell the parents that they really have a right to appeal at that point if their child was not found eligible for the over 3 services. So sometimes when I start working with families, I'll ask them, what happened at age 3? Did the regional center do an assessment to see if your child was eligible for over 3? And if they did an assessment, what was the results? And if they found your child not eligible for over 3 services, did they inform you why? And also your right to appeal that. So sometimes we go back, even though the child's maybe 10, 15 years old, whatever, and we reapply for those over 3 services and really either get new testing or gather more past testing to show that the individual was in fact disabled, developmentally disabled prior to the age of 18, and therefore should be eligible for the over 3 services. So what's the definition of the over 3 services through the regional center? As I say, it should be determined just about age 3, or of course now with the new eligibility up to 5, it could be determined at age 3, 4, or 5. Now, the Lanterman Act defines developmental disability, to mean a disability that begins before the age of 18. Now, I sometimes get families who are referred to me, and I work with them, and their disabled adult is maybe 45 years old, never applied for the regional center. And current testing might show that they have an intellectual disability, for instance, but we have to get documentation showing that they were developmentally disabled prior to the age of 18. Usually, the best way to document that is through special education records, but special ed doesn't save those records forever. So we sometimes have to dig deeper, and the parents have to maybe have records or know where records can be obtained that does document the developmental disability prior to the age 18. The second criteria is it has to be expected to continue indefinitely, and it constitutes a substantial disability to the individual. This is a second part of the definition or the eligibility criteria I think a lot of parents don't realize is that you have to not only have the diagnosis of, and these are the qualifying conditions, a developmental disability includes intellectual disability, cerebral palsy, epilepsy, autism, or this is what's called the 5th category, or a disabling condition closely related to an intellectual disability, or requiring treatment similar to that required for individuals with an intellectual disability. So again, you have to have documentation that it occurred prior to age 18. And then it has to, well, let me do this slide first. Developmental disabilities are not learning disabilities, mental health disorders, or anything just physical in nature except for cerebral palsy. So there's nothing that says we can't have a consumer that's duly diagnosed. In other words, an individual with a developmental disability can also have a mental health disorder. But if the disability is solely a learning disability, mental health or physical, that they're not going to qualify. And so sometimes the special ed records, and that's one of the first things I ask families, I say, how did your child qualify for special ed? And if they say it was a ADHD or it was a specific learning disability, I know we're going to maybe have some issues because those are not qualifying conditions for the regional center. So this is the second part of the definition I was talking about. The person has to have one of those disabilities, intellectual disability, cerebral palsy, autism, seizure disorder, or the fifth category, but that disability has to result in a significant functional limitation in 3 or more of the following areas: self-care, receptive and expressive language, learning, mobility, self-direction, capacity for independent living, and economic self-sufficiency. Now, if the person has functional limitations in some of these areas due to their mental health, let's say they're duly diagnosed, they have intellectual disability or they have autism and mental health, but the regional center has to somehow ferret out whether or not the functional limitation is due to the autism or is the functional limitation due to the mental health. And so we sometimes get into that situation with the regional center where they'll say, yeah, they've got a qualifying diagnosis, but the functional limitations that they have are not due to the developmental disability, not due to the autism, it's due to the mental health. And so then we sometimes have to appeal the cases or gather additional information or have additional assessments done. Okay, the regional center's responsibilities. Regional centers do not provide direct services. I think, as most of you know, they provide services through what they call their vendors. So they identify and approve and fund community services, community agency, through a process called vendorization. And they're able to pay those vendors the amount that the state allows them to pay. So regional centers, and the other big thing is that regional centers must pursue all possible other sources of funding before they'll get their checkbook out. So in other words, if there's a service that's identified in the IPP, which we'll talk about in a moment, but that need can be met through another agency, private insurance, education, MediCal, IHSS, regional center is required to have the family first tap into those sources before they get their checkbook out. Regional centers this is what's called regional centers are considered to be payers of last resort. Now, I don't know, I think I have a slide about this, but let's talk about the special needs trust. Sometimes on occasion, we have had regional centers that have said, well, this individual has a special needs trust. We've had regional centers that have said, we're not going to pay for anything because they have a special needs trust, and the special needs trust says it can pay for all these things. We took a case like that all the way up in front of an administrative law judge, and we prevailed. In other words, the judge said that when the legislature said that regional centers must tap into all other sources of funding, they didn't mean special needs trust. They meant other public agencies, public sources. So we won on that case, and we haven't had any other regional centers push on that and taken us to fair hearing. So far that has stood. All the services that the regional centers provide are determined through the individual program plan. I think a lot of you are familiar with the IEPs, individual educational plans, very similar. And the services that are in the IPP are the entitlement for that individual. And the philosophy of the regional center is to provide services that will allow a consumer's life to approximate that of his or her same age non-disabled peers. And services do vary from one regional center to another. When you're found eligible for services in one regional center, you're automatically, if you move or the consumer moves, they're automatically eligible in every regional center. But sometimes the services may change. There's different vendors. If you're out in the middle of Inyo County, things are going to look a lot different than if you're in downtown Los Angeles or San Francisco. An IPP planning team consists of the consumer, if they're an adult, or a parent, if they're a child, or the conservator, and a representative from the regional center. That's all it takes to be on a planning team meeting for an IPP to be developed, 2 people. But it can and should include anyone else who knows that consumer, other family members, friends, neighbors, coworkers, service providers, support persons, any individual invited by the consumer or the authorized rep. And then the regional center can say who they want to have also attending the IPP meeting. Okay, what's in the IPP? First of all, there's an assessment. And this is what I many times have to say to families. They'll say, well, we asked for this service and we didn't get it. And the first question I'll say is, well, was there an assessment? Did you ask for an assessment first? Because everything is based upon assessed need. So if you're wanting independent living skills training, let's get an assessment. See if Johnny needs ILS and in what areas he needs independent living skills training. IPP also includes the goals, both long-term and short-term, the short-term objectives, and then the important part of the IPP are the services and supports to achieve those goals and objectives that have been identified by the planning team. Whether or not they're funded by regional center, they are components, they are part of the IPP. Now, while the regional center services are not financially means tested, if the service is being provided to a child, there are some fees now that parents have to pay. There's a family cost participation program. That's where certain services, primarily respite and after school care, depending upon the parent's income, they may have to pay for part of that. If it's a child, they may have to pay an annual program fee of $200 a year. And then parental financial responsibility program is, there are times when a minor child is placed into a residential facility, a group home, by the regional center. And again, if they're under 18, the parents, depending upon their income, may have to pay for part of the cost of that group home. And then the state, through the regional center, picks up the balance. Now, an adult consumer of the regional center is not responsible to pay for any services. And here's what I was talking about before, a special needs trust issue. The administrative law judge did rule in our favor on that. So what services do regional centers provide? And again, it's based upon need. It's not a menu that every regional center consumer gets. It's based upon an identified need and then how that need can be met. So regional centers can pay for board and care homes. They can pay for independent living skills training. They can pay for supported living services. I don't know if everyone's aware of what supported living services is. I refer to it as the real Cadillac of services that regional centers can provide. Supported living services, SLS, is where the adult is living in their own home, not in the parent's home. They live in their own home, paid for by someone else other than the regional center. So the parents have to either rent a condo or an apartment or buy it. Their adult child lives in there. The services necessary for the adult child, the regional center consumer, to live in that home, to live safely and successfully, the regional center can pay an agency to provide the staff up to 24 hours a day through supported living services. Tailored day services is somewhat of a new service also. That's for individuals that maybe don't want the traditional adult day program, 5 days a week, 6 hours a day. Tailored day services is usually about 20 to 30 hours a month. It would be for someone that maybe wants to do volunteer work or attend a community college class, and the regional center can pay an agency to have a staff person with the consumer to do those activities. Family home agency is like a foster family for an adult, and then there's foster family agencies for children. Other major services that regional centers provide: in-home respite, out-of-home respite, transportation services to day programs, adult day programs that I talked about, supported employment. That's where the regional center can pay an agency, a supported employment agency, to find a job for the individual. Actually, they do that through the Department of Rehab, and then a job coach is assigned. And if the job coach can't be withdrawn within about 2 to 3 months, then the funding for the job coach transitions from the Department of Rehabilitation to the regional center, and the regional center can pay for that job coach for the rest of the time that that consumer has that job. The regional centers can pay for behavioral services. That is required, though, that the parents access through private health insurance or any other source that may be able to pay for behavioral services. There's a new program that some of you maybe have heard about, and I could do a whole another hour on this, so I'll just hit it real quick. It's called self-determination. This is a new way to receive services from the regional center. You have more control over selecting your services and supports. It gives the consumer families a specific budget from which to purchase services. The budget is based upon what the cost would be to the regional center to provide services to that individual in the traditional way. The traditional way being the regional center pays a vendor a state rate to provide the services. With self-determination, you're not required to use regional center vendors. You can, but you can also use other individuals. The amount that's in the budget is based upon last year's expenditures that the regional center spent on your child or adult and any new and unmet needs. So you come up with a budget and then you come up with a spending plan, but the money is not given to the family. It does require that you use what's called financial management services. That's an organization who will receive the money from the regional center and spend it, employ the people in the way that the spending plan has been agreed to by the regional center and the family. I'm working with a number of families now on self-determination. It's a bit of a lockstep, to go through. Regional centers are still sort of learning the ropes on this, but it's very, very beneficial to a lot of families. Okay, there also is due process in any system. There can be appeals that are filed, and anytime the regional center says no to something, you can appeal it. They sometimes issue you a notice of action, sometimes they don't, but even if they don't issue you a notice of action, you can appeal it. And there's 3 levels of appeal. Informal meeting, that's where you meet with the regional center representative that was not involved with the original decision, and I always recommend that as a first step. You can go to mediation. Both parties have to agree, both the regional center and the family or the individual has to agree to mediation, and it is voluntary, it's non-binding, but it can resolve the issue. And the agreements are confidential. So sometimes we get the regional center to agree to things because they know we're not going to be able to advertise it to other families. It's confidential. And then the formal fair hearing, which would be in front of an administrative law judge. Okay, a lot of information. And so I'll turn it back to Alyssa. I think you may have some questions.
We do have some questions and comments. The chat has been pretty active. So Let's just start with the first one at the top, which I'm getting to. So hold on. Someone's just saying, I presume that a Cal Able account, the $100,000 limit is not counted toward your SSI eligibilities.
Very good. That's correct. Cal Able, you can put up to $16,000 a year into from any source, and up to $100,000 is the maximum amount. You can put more in there, but anything over $100,000 would be counted towards the $2,000 resource limit. That's correct.
Okay. And then if you could please expand on how distributions from a third-party special needs trust affects SSI. Right.
Very good question. If there's a distribution from a third-party special needs trust directly to the individual, that's income. And after the first $20, then that money would be counted as income and would reduce dollar for dollar the SSI benefit for that month. Now, most folks who administer third-party special needs trust know not to do that. The other distribution, though, from a special needs trust that can affect the amount of SSI is if that trust is paying, we talked about it before, food and shelter. And third-party special needs trust, even first-party special needs trust, can pay for food and shelter. Usually the language says if it's in the best interest of the beneficiary. But if the special needs trust does make a distribution or is paying for food and shelter, then that can reduce in that 280 reduction in the SSI check. Now, what we do, it's a strange word to use, but we launder money through the ABLE accounts. By putting money into the ABLE account from the trust, and then the ABLE account paying for the food and shelter, it's not counted as in-kind support and maintenance by Social Security, does not result in the 280 reduction. So it's a great way to use the ABLE account. As long as the distribution from as long as the money that's distributed from the ABLE account is used for food and shelter within 30 days.
Okay. Complicated answer to a complicated question. If you have Medicare and MediCal and IHSS because you get DCB, is there still an income limit, and am I still limited to $2,000 resources to keep my IHSS? Lots of acronyms in that.
Yeah, you're only eligible for IHSS, in-home support services, if the individual is on MediCal. So if they lose their SSI and therefore lose their SSI-linked MediCal, they're going to lose their IHSS. However, if you recall, I had a slide that showed that if you're not on SSI, maybe because the disabled adult child benefit is too high, you can go through the county and you can get MediCal. There's so many different ways to get MediCal. And as long as you're on MediCal, you can then have IHSS.
And I'm assuming, Jim, that if the person switches from MediCal to Medicare, the answer remains the same.
Well, if they're on, they can be Medi-Medi. So they can be on, they may be on MediCal because they're on SSI, they may be on MediCal through the county. But then they also could be on Medicare because they're on SSDI, CDB through their parents. Then they become Medi-Medi.
So they retain their MediCal in order to retain their IHSS.
Right. And that many times is one of the most important things to families.
Okay. Does the disabled adult's rent to the parents have to be claimed by the parents on their taxes to the IRS?
People always ask me that. I am not a tax person. Sorry, can't give you any advice on taxes.
Okay, thanks anyway. What happens if our disabled child who has been qualifying for MediCal as a SARC consumer via institutional deeming turns 18? Does our adult child continue to qualify for MediCal through institutional deeming as an adult? Or does our child discontinue receiving MediCal benefits at age 18 and need to reapply?
Very good question. Yeah, they don't need the institutional deeming anymore. At 18, what we'll want to do is get them on SSI. And of course, as soon as they're on SSI, they're on MediCal.
Okay. Someone is asking about the Pickle Amendment. They're saying actually because of the Pickle Amendment, a person when transitioning from SSI to SSDI CDB can keep MediCal and get Medicare if they continue to meet the non-medical financial limitations.
Yeah, there is the Pickle Amendment. That was Congressman Pickle that said that if a person loses their MediCal because they have transitioned over from SSI over to SSDI or SSDI CDB, and therefore have Medicare now, that they can continue to get the MediCal through the county under the Pickle Amendment. Now, I've seen the counties administer Pickle in a variety of ways. If you really drill down on the language of the Pickle Amendment, it looks at the cost of living increases that the individual is receiving through the SSDI CDB. And therefore, if you calculate that out and they still would qualify, they would otherwise qualify for the SSI, except for the fact that they're now getting SSDI CDB, then they can continue to be on the MediCal.
Okay.
But I would advise people to do their research on Pickle.
Yeah, here's another question on Pickle. Is there any way Jim could please cover the child in care benefit through Social Security as well as the Pickle program for MediCal when transitioning from SSI to SSDI when a parent starts to get retirement benefits? I'm not sure if that was the same question.
Yeah, I think we covered that. Yeah.
Okay. Somebody says this is incredibly helpful, so thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Can my child who was transferred from SSI to SSDI by Social Security still get IHSS once he's transferred from MediCal to Medicare? I think we also covered that one. We were saying to keep it the Medi.
Yep.
So
if there's any way to keep the child on MediCal, then we can keep the IHSS.
yes, but if they're off MediCal, then IHSS would go away. And I guess a follow-up question to that is then will the regional center who looks to IHSS first for before SLS services, are they okay with that? If you say, well, we're not on Medicare, we're not on MediCal anymore, we're on Medicare and we don't have IHSS, so we need SLS instead.
What they would say to that family is go to the local county MediCal agency and apply for MediCal, get on MediCal any way you can so that you can be on IHSS. So we, the regional center, don't have to spend so much money on SLS.
Yeah, then come back to us. Okay.
Yeah, then come back.
Just to let everyone know, please, I did put the link to the evaluation for tonight's presentation in the chat. I can do it again in a little bit. There's one in English and one in Spanish for the Spanish speaker out there. But if you could please fill that out this evening, I very, very much appreciate it. Thank you. Does my 403B retirement account affect my SSI application?
Is this the disabled person who
I think so.
Yeah, it can. It gets the value of that or the distributions from that can affect it. It gets very complicated. So I would suggest you do some research on that. But yes, it can affect your eligibility.
Okay. And this is the second time I'm seeing this comment that the 280 is now 300.
Oh, that could be the new number. Because 280 was what it was. That's the reduction. But yeah.
280 is now 300. Okay. Great information. Are we going to be able to see this information video to share with my husband? Yes. Give us about 3 weeks to a month to edit the video and put it on the PHP e-learning channel. SSDI and CDB. I will be able to draw retirement soon, so my adult child can file for SSDI CDB. He now has SSI. My husband, who will have a much higher retirement amount, will not retire for many years. Younger, okay. Can we move our child's SSDI/CDB from being tied to my Social Security amount to my husband's once he retires?
Yes.
Okay, long question, short answer. I love it. If we have MediCal and get Medicare later due to my husband's retirement, are we losing MediCal and IHSS services? I think we covered that one.
Yeah.
Okay. Here someone's commenting, you don't necessarily lose MediCal if you go on CDB. You can still retain MediCal if the only reason child loses SSI is because CDB payment is over $2,000.
Yeah, I think they're referring to the Pickle again.
Okay, good old Pickle. Is IHS lost at age 18? I'm going to say no.
Is IHSS lost at 18?
Yes.
IHSS is any age.
Yeah. What if you start the institutional deeming for MediCal while they are under 18, but the process of getting MediCal continues into them turning 18? What happens to their application?
Well, once they turn 18, there won't be any need for institutional deeming because only the adults' income and resources are going to be looked at.
All right. You just go straight to SSI.
And go straight to SSI. Yeah.
Yeah. Can a community college student who is a DOR client get SSI?
Yeah, there's nothing that, DOR many times sponsors people to go to community colleges. And so that does not, read the question again.
Can a community college student who is a DOR client get SSI?
Yes.
I just want to be mindful of the time. It's 7:33. Jim did say he'd stay on for another 15 or 20 minutes or so.
Sure.
Looks like we have about several more questions, so I'll see if we can get through them all. I was told that SSI triggered when my child gets MediCal, but it sounds like you're saying it's the other way around.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, MediCal does not trigger SSI. MediCal, if you're just getting MediCal, that's through your local county. SSI is through the federal agency called Social Security Administration.
Okay. Somebody saying, thank you so much for clearing so many things up. Does a special needs trust need to be completely funded before you apply and get SSI?
Oh, good question.
Yeah.
No, a special needs trust can be funded at any time. It can be funded. First party special needs trusts, as I said many times, are funded through personal injury lawsuits, but third party are usually funded upon the passing of the parent. Now, Social Security wants to know if there is a special needs trust, even if it's not funded. And you wonder why. Well, the reason why is that someday they're going to do what's called a financial review, and those are just randomly done. And in 2 years, if they do a financial review, or 10 years from now, they want to be able to look into the record and say, oh, we see that you have a special needs trust that wasn't funded 10 years ago. Is it funded now? So they just want to always be able to follow up, because as soon as it's funded, then they really are going to put the fine tooth comb to it to see if it's properly written and the distributions that are being made from that trust.
Okay. I think this might be some clarification from the person who asked a question about the 403B. So they're saying, let me get this right. So my 403B will affect my child when he turns 18 for SSI.
No, not when he turns 18. No.
Right. Somebody saying, thank you for the workshop. Just want to clarify. There's a possibility my child who just turned 18 will lose MediCal via institutional deeming. We're just beginning the process of SSI, and we know it takes time.
No,
we don't want to lose the MediCal and in turn IHSS.
Yeah, they'll continue to have the child on MediCal during that process, during the SSI application process.
A question about ABLE accounts. How do you qualify for one? How to qualify for an ABLE account for someone who is 60 years old on SSI if medical records show the disability is very old?
No, that's fine. As long as you're disabled, and the criteria is pretty loose for ABLE accounts. I think there's a form that's filled out. But if you're on Social Security or SSI, how old is the person?
60 years old.
Oh, because at 65, people can go on SSI just because they're 65. But if they're 60 on SSI, that means they're disabled. That would qualify them automatically for an ABLE account.
We haven't touched on this, or maybe you did, but can a disabled child under 18 get SSI, and how?
Yeah. But remember, under 18, the parent's income and resources are counted. Now, remember the name of the MediCal is called institutional deeming. The reason that they call it that is that if there is a child who's in a institution, they can qualify for SSI, and the parent's income and resources are not counted. That's one way that a child under 18 can qualify for SSI, and the parent's income and resources not count, is if they're in an institution.
Okay. Others are lots of thank yous for taking the time and sharing the information. Very helpful. Thanks for the clarification. Thanks to you and to PHP. Someone's just commenting that ABLE must be, in order to get an ABLE account, you need to be disabled prior to the age of 26. Is that correct?
I'm sorry. That's right. I'm sorry. I stand corrected. Corrected. That's right. Prior to age 26.
And then someone saying my regional center suggested we started the MediCal application now. Can I apply for SSI as soon as I do that? I have 30 days to apply for MediCal and can't also apply for SSI while I'm doing that. Is that to apply to SSI after that? Any problems?
You can apply for SSI at any age, but after 18 is only the child's income and resources are counted.
Right.
I guess getting back to the able thing, that 61-year-old, my understanding is they could apply to open an able account, but they would have to show that they were disabled prior to the age of 26. I don't think you have to apply prior to 26. You just have to have been disabled prior to 26.
Yeah, I think that's what the comment said. I have to go back and look, but okay. Please explain the process to obtain the child in care benefit once a husband or wife retires.
How the disabled adult child, the first step is for one of the parents to go on Social Security retirement. And it's funny, one of the questions you're asked when you apply for Social Security retirement is, do you have a disabled child? And people always wonder about that. Well, that's the reason, because you obviously want to say yes. And as soon as you're on that benefit, then we apply for the DAC, the CDB benefit.
Okay. We have reached the ends of our questions. So unless anyone else has anything else, lots of thank yous and great information, and hope you can come back. Oh, 2 more questions popped up.
Okay.
All right, we have, let's just give it 5 minutes, okay? Clarification, please. If the minor child is already institutionally deemed through the regional center and has MediCal, does he qualify for SSI without taking parents' income?
Oh, too bad. No.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? No,
Yeah,
not in this life. If you can't prove disability before 26 because records no longer exist, can you still open an ABLE account?
Yeah, that's up to the bank. That's not a public benefit, so I'm not. I don't know. I think there's a process by which you self-declare that you were disabled. My understanding of the ABLE accounts is it's pretty liberal as far as whether you were disabled prior to 26 or not.
Yeah, I just opened one recently for my daughter, and I remember that question. It was sort of a self-declaration.
Yeah.
You didn't have to prove anything. Oh, but I remember somebody saying, make sure you have a letter from a doctor, proving when the disability was, just in case somebody asks for it, but they never heard of anybody asking for it.
Yes. Yeah, they're pretty loose. They want your money.
Yeah. No, somebody says it's between you and the IRS if you can't prove it.
Well, that's probably true.
Are CalAble funds excluded from being taxed?
Again, tax question, sorry.
What about 524 plans? I don't know if you want to comment on 524 plans and if they're excluded from being taxed. Probably not, I'm going to guess.
No.
Can you please repeat the benefit of the part that you can move some funds from special needs trust to an ABLE account to spend for food and housing?
Yeah. ABLE account can be funded from any source. That can be the special needs trust or any. Sometimes if people have excess SSI money and they're going to go over the $2,000 resource limit, they'll maybe plop it into an ABLE account. Although that's not usually the best thing, because that means it hasn't been spent on the person for what it's supposed to be spent on. But no, it can go into from any source. It can go into the special needs trust, and then it can be spent on food and shelter.
Okay, and with that, it's 7:42. I am going to call it. I'm going to thank Jim very much for his time and for his wisdom, the wealth of information.